By the end of a single afternoon, nearly 50,000 Roman soldiers were dead, not scattered across the countryside, not cut down while fleeing, not broken in retreat. They were crushed where they stood, so tightly packed that many never received a fatal blow. They suffocated, collapsed, and were trampled beneath their own ranks, unable even to raise their arms. This was not supposed to happen. Rome had assembled the largest army in its history, more than 80,000 infantry, supported by thousands of cavalry, a force so overwhelming that Roman commanders believed no enemy in Italy could survive direct contact. Across the plain stood Hannibal Barca, outnumbered, deep in enemy territory, cut off from reinforcements. By every known rule of warfare, his army should have been annihilated. Instead, what happened here became the most studied battlefield trap ever executed. The question was never whether men would die. The question was how Rome walked willingly into its own destruction. The date was early August, 216 BC. The place was a flat, open plain near the small village of Cannae in southern Italy, bordered by the Aufidus River. The heat was oppressive. Dust hung in the air, kicked up by tens of thousands of marching feet. A steady wind blew directly into the Roman advance, driving grit into their eyes and drying their throats. Command of the Roman army rotated daily between two consuls. On this day, authority rested with Gaius Terentius Varro. Varro believed speed and aggression would end the war. He believed Hannibal could be crushed by force alone. Across the field, Hannibal Barca, in his early 40s, watched silently. He was lean from years of campaigning. Battle-hardened, calm. The numbers were stark. Rome, approximately 86,000 infantry and cavalry combined. Carthage, approximately 50,000 total. A numerical advantage approaching 2-1. In ancient warfare, that margin usually meant certainty. But numbers only matter if they can move. And at Cannae, Hannibal was about to prove that space, not strength, decides battles. Rome did not come to Cannae to maneuver. It came to end the war. Roman commanders believed Hannibal's previous victories had relied on ambush and terrain. Here, on an open plain, they believed those advantages disappeared. The plan was direct. Rome massed its infantry into an unusually deep formation, compressing its legions tighter than normal. The logic was simple. A deeper formation meant more weight. More weight meant greater pushing power. Greater pressure would rupture Hannibal's center. Once the enemy line broke, the Roman advance would turn into a slaughter. Cavalry was assigned a secondary role. Hold the flanks long enough for the infantry to decide the battle. From a Roman perspective, the mathematics were clear. If 80,000 men pushed forward as a single body, no army of 50,000 could withstand the force. This was not recklessness. It was orthodox Roman doctrine. But here's what the chronicles don't tell you clearly enough. By compressing their formation, Rome was trading flexibility for pressure, and Hannibal was counting on that trade. Hannibal did something no Roman commander expected. He placed his weakest troops in the center, Gallic and Iberian infantry, brave, aggressive, but less disciplined, were positioned directly opposite Rome's main Udard force. His best infantry, the African veterans, were placed on the flanks instead. To Roman eyes, this looked like desperation, a thin, exposed center, a gamble forced by inferior numbers. But Hannibal was not arranging his army for resistance. He was arranging it for absorption. The central line was positioned in a shallow forward arc, subtly bulging toward the Romans. This shape mattered. As Rome advanced, the bulge ensured first contact would occur exactly where Hannibal wanted pressure to build. The center was ordered not to break, but also not to hold rigidly. Step back slowly. Maintain cohesion. Yield ground without collapsing. What looked like retreat was actually controlled compression. Every Roman step forward would shorten their own formation. Every meter gained would tighten their ranks. Meanwhile, Hannibal's African infantry on the flanks held position, waiting. The trap was already active before the first casualty fell. Rome just didn't know it yet. As the Roman infantry pushed forward, Gaius Terentius Varro saw exactly what he expected to see. The enemy center was giving ground. To a Roman commander, This meant only one thing: the enemy was breaking. Vero ordered the advance to continue, not cautiously, not in measured bounds, forward, relentless, uninterrupted. The deeper Roman formation now began to compress even further. Units overlapped. Intervals narrowed. Officers struggled to relay commands through the mass, but Vero did not see danger. He saw momentum. This was Rome's strength, discipline and pressure applied without hesitation. What Vero did not account for was control without panic. Hannibal's center did not dissolve. It withdrew evenly, maintaining contact across the line. There was no sudden collapse, no rout, no signal of victory or defeat. This was deeply misleading. Roman doctrine taught that a retreating enemy was a defeated enemy. There was no framework for understanding intentional withdrawal under pressure. By the time Roman officers began to sense something was wrong, the formation was already locked. They could not easily redeploy. They could not widen their line. They could not disengage. Rome had committed its entire mass forward. The battle's outcome was now determined, even though most of the killing had not yet begun. The main engagement began shortly before midday. Roman infantry made contact along the center first. Exactly as planned, shields slammed together. Swords struck in tight quarters. Dust rose until the horizon blurred. From the Roman perspective, the signs were encouraging. Hannibal's central units were yielding ground. The bulge in the Carthaginian line began to flatten, then curve inward. Roman soldiers shouted. Officers pressed the advance. This was the moment every legionary was trained to recognize. The enemy was being pushed back by superior force. Casualties mounted on both sides, but the Roman mass kept moving forward, not quickly, relentlessly. Each step felt like progress, but what felt like momentum was actually loss of space. As Roman units advanced, their rear ranks continued to press forward as well. The front could not spread out. The flanks could not maneuver. The formation became denser with every minute. This density created a dangerous illusion. Because the Romans were still moving forward, they believed they were winning. They did not notice that the Carthaginian center was no longer straight. It was now distinctly concave, drawing the Roman line inward. Hannibal remained mounted behind his troops, watching quietly. The most important phase of the battle was already underway, and very few men on the field understood it. Rome thought the enemy was collapsing. In reality, Rome was entering the trap. As the Roman advance continued, the battlefield began to change in ways most soldiers could not immediately perceive. The sun climbed higher. Heat intensified. Dust thickened the air. Roman infantry were now packed tightly together, far tighter than standard fighting intervals. In normal conditions, a legionary needed space to swing a sword, raise a shield, and step backward or sideways. At Cannae, that space was disappearing. Men pressed from behind forced the front ranks forward. Those in the middle had no view of the enemy, only the backs of their own comrades. Commands became difficult to hear. Signals were lost in the noise and dust. The deeper Roman formation, once considered an advantage, was now a liability. Movement slowed. Cohesion tightened to the point of rigidity. At the same time, Hannibal's center continued its controlled withdrawal. Not a rout, not a collapse. A measured, disciplined bend inward. The geometry of the battlefield was shifting. Rome's massive rectangular formation was being reshaped into a narrowing wedge, longer, deeper, and increasingly confined. In this environment, numbers no longer translated into power. Strength could not be applied efficiently. Fatigue accumulated faster. Confusion spread through the ranks. Yet from above, the Roman line still appeared to be advancing. This illusion of progress prevented any attempt to halt or redeploy. By the time Roman officers recognized the danger, their army no longer possessed the space required to escape it. While Rome's attention remained fixed on the collapsing center, the decisive movement began elsewhere. On the Carthaginian flanks, Hannibal's African infantry had not moved. They had stood firm, disciplined, heavily armed, and angled slightly inward from the start. Now Hannibal gave the signal. The African units pivoted, not forward, but inward. This movement was subtle at first, a controlled turn, a shift in orientation rather than a charge, but its effect was devastating. As the Roman infantry continued to press into the concave center, they suddenly found hostile forces appearing along their sides. At the same moment, Carthaginian cavalry, already victorious on the wings, completed their task. Roman cavalry had been overwhelmed quickly, driven off the field, or cut down. With no opposition remaining, Carthaginian horsemen turned inward, riding behind the Roman mass. The trap was closing from 3 directions: front, left, right. Within minutes, Roman soldiers began to realize something was wrong. There was no open flank to dress the line, no rearward space to fall back, no visible route of retreat. The Roman formation, once a symbol of order and strength, was now sealed. Hannibal had achieved what no commander before him had accomplished. He had completely encircled a numerically superior army, not through speed or surprise, but through timing and geometry. The battle's outcome was now inevitable. Once the encirclement was complete, the character of the battle changed instantly. This was no longer a contest of formations. It became a crisis of command and control. Roman officers attempted to issue new orders, but the density of the formation made coordination impossible. Messengers could not move. Standards were obscured by dust and bodies. Sound was swallowed by noise and confusion. The Roman army was now fighting without direction. Units could not turn as a whole. Individuals could barely turn at all. Attempts to push outward failed immediately. Every movement met solid resistance from African infantry or Carthaginian cavalry. The Romans had no reserve to deploy. Every available man was already compressed into the killing space. Consul Lucius Aemilius Paulus attempted to stabilize the situation, moving through the ranks on foot. He was wounded early, but continued to give orders where he could. Varro, commanding from another sector, found himself unable to influence the battle at all. The Roman system relied on flexibility within discipline. At Cannae, discipline remained, but flexibility was gone. The army had become a single immobile mass. As casualties mounted, gaps appeared, but they could not be exploited. There was nowhere to move into. What had once been Rome's greatest strength, its ability to concentrate force, had become the mechanism of its destruction. With the Roman army fully encircled, the battle became brutally one-sided. Carthaginian infantry did not rush the trapped mass. They tightened it. Step by step, the encirclement contracted. Roman soldiers were forced closer together, shoulder to shoulder, chest to back. Many could no longer swing their swords. Some could barely raise their shields. As the pressure increased, men began to collapse from exhaustion and heat. Those who fell could not rise. The density of the formation created a deadly chain reaction. When one man went down, others stumbled over him. Those behind continued to press forward, unaware of what was happening ahead. Breathing became difficult. Water was gone. The dust-filled air burned lungs and eyes. At this stage, death often came, not from enemy blades, but from suffocation and crushing force. Carthaginian troops exploited this mercilessly. Short stabbing weapons were driven into exposed gaps. Blows were aimed low, where armor was weakest. There was no room for Roman discipline to reassert itself. Cohesion, once an advantage, now meant collective helplessness. Casualties increased, not linearly, but exponentially. The longer the Romans remained trapped, the faster they died. Hannibal's formation functioned like a vice, not snapping shut at once, but tightening until resistance ceased. By mid-afternoon, the Roman army was no longer fighting as a force. It was being destroyed as a mass. The destruction of the Roman army did not happen quickly. It unfolded over hours. Encirclement does not produce instant collapse. It produces inevitability. Roman soldiers continued to resist wherever they could. Small groups fought desperately to hold space. Officers tried to impose order on chaos, but time itself had become the enemy. Every minute trapped inside the encirclement reduced the chances of survival. Fatigue compounded. Wounds went untreated. Heat drained strength from even the most disciplined veterans. Carthaginian troops rotated in and out of combat, maintaining pressure while preserving their own endurance. The Romans could not. They had no rear, no relief, no water. As the afternoon wore on, resistance weakened. The Roman army did not rout. It did not panic, unmass. It simply ceased to function. Individual soldiers fought until they could no longer stand. Those who collapsed were crushed beneath the weight of the living and the dead. Consul Lucius Aemilius Paulus was killed during this phase of the battle. His death removed the last coherent Roman command presence within the pocket. By late afternoon, the killing slowed, not because mercy was shown, but because there were fewer men left able to resist. Cannae was no longer a battle. It was an execution carried out by geometry, pressure, and time. When the fighting finally ended, the scale of the disaster became clear. The battlefield around Cannae was covered with bodies. Ancient sources vary in their numbers, but even conservative accounts agree on the magnitude. Roman dead, approximately 45,000 to 50,000 Roman captured, several thousand more Carthaginian dead, roughly 6,000 to 8,000. The casualty ratio was staggering. For every Carthaginian killed, 6 to 8 Roman soldiers died. Entire Roman legions had ceased to exist. Consuls, senators, tribunes, and veteran officers lay among the dead. Rome had lost not just manpower, but experience that could not be replaced quickly. What shocked contemporaries most was not simply the number of casualties. It was how concentrated the loss was. This was not a running battle across miles of countryside. It was annihilation within a confined space. The Roman army had not been defeated in detail. It had been destroyed as a single unit. Survivors who escaped the field carried the news back to Rome in fragments. At first, the reports were not believed. An army of that size could not simply vanish. But it had. Cannae represented one of the most complete battlefield destructions in recorded history. Despite the scale of the victory, Hannibal's situation remained precarious. His army had won the most devastating battle of the war, but it had not destroyed Rome itself. Carthaginian losses, though small by comparison, were significant. Many of the fallen were experienced veterans, men who could not be easily replaced. More importantly, Hannibal lacked the resources required to exploit the victory fully. He had no siege equipment, no reinforcements from Carthage, no reliable supply lines. Rome, by contrast, still possessed vast manpower reserves. The Roman state did not collapse. Instead, it absorbed the shock. The Senate refused to negotiate. Emergency measures were enacted. New legions were raised, including units composed of older men and even enslaved citizens. Cannae shattered Rome's armies, but not its political will. For Hannibal, this revealed a brutal reality. Tactical perfection did not guarantee strategic success. The trap at Cannae destroyed an army, but it did not end the war. Rome would adapt, and in doing so, it would change the nature of warfare against Hannibal forever. Cannae forced Rome to confront an uncomfortable truth. Its traditional approach to warfare had failed. For generations, Rome had relied on decisive battle, concentrating force, seeking direct confrontation, and trusting discipline to prevail. After Cannae, that doctrine was abandoned. Instead, Rome turned to a strategy of avoidance and attrition, later associated with Quintus Fabius Maximus. Roman armies would no longer seek Hannibal in open battle. They would shadow him, harass his foragers, deny him supplies. Cities were ordered to hold out rather than fight in the field. Scorched earth tactics were employed to limit Hannibal's freedom of movement. This was not a glorious strategy, but it was effective. Rome also restructured its command approach. Consular aggression was restrained. Caution replaced ambition. Cannae became a warning embedded deeply into Roman military culture. Never again would Rome allow an enemy to dictate the terms of engagement so completely. Ironically, Hannibal's greatest victory taught Rome how to defeat him. By refusing decisive battle, Rome neutralized the very brilliance that had destroyed its armies. The war would drag on for years, but from this point forward, Rome was no longer fighting on Hannibal's terms. Cannae did not fade into history as a single catastrophic defeat. It became a template. More than 2,000 years later, the battle is still studied at military academies around the world, at West Point, at Sandhurst, at staff colleges that train modern armored and mechanized commanders, not because the weapons were advanced, but because the logic was timeless. Cannae demonstrated that destruction does not require superiority in numbers. It requires superiority in position, timing, and understanding human behavior under pressure. The double-envelopment Hannibal executed became a foundational concept in operational warfare. It reappeared centuries later in different forms, in cavalry encirclements, in mechanized pincer movements, in modern doctrines of operational encirclement. The principle remains unchanged. Force the enemy to commit fully, control their movement, remove their ability to maneuver, then compress. What makes Cannae uniquely disturbing is not just the scale of death, it is the realization that the Roman army did nothing irrational. It followed doctrine. It trusted experience. It believed numbers and discipline would protect it. That belief was exploited. Hannibal did not defeat Rome by being unpredictable. He defeated Rome by understanding exactly how Rome thought and designing a battlefield that punished those assumptions. Cannae stands as a warning embedded in military history. That pressure can be a weapon. That space is as valuable as strength. That an army can be destroyed without ever realizing the battle is lost. In the end, Rome survived because it learned. It stopped seeking decisive confrontation. It adapted. It endured. But the lesson of Cannae remains. Sometimes the most dangerous moment in war is when everything appears to be going according to plan, because that is when the trap is already closed.